Hello there, I'm Gloria Makarenko. Spinning tales and shifting cultures. This is Our Vancouver. Coming up, the dawning of a new habit at grocery stores. And troubled by too much talk? Let's turn the page on climate action. But first, food from an old culture? For some, it's what's in the everyday lunchbox. A young Vancouver author has just published a new children's book, and it's full of colorful depictions of dragons, far-flung countries, and food. Karina Zhou is here to tell us about her award-winning book now. Karina, hello there.
Hi, Gloria. Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about where you are, first of all. You're from Vancouver, but we've caught up with you in San Francisco. So what are you doing there?
Yeah, I'm studying college at San Francisco at California College of the Arts. I'm currently majoring in animation.
Well, tell us about how this whole book idea came about.
Yeah, so it all began when I wanted to enter a picture book contest that was hosted by a Chinese and French organization. And so I reflected a lot about my life and I realized I want to tell this story about when I brought tea eggs to my class on Multicultural Day. And that experience changed a lot of my perspective on how I view my culture and my confidence in expressing my culture to my friends. And so I created this storybook for this contest, and it did so well there that I wanted to share it with the rest of the world.
Well, let's talk about the food that you brought to school then when you were young, the tea eggs. Tell us about the tea eggs.
Tea eggs is a really common dish in a lot of Asian countries and in China. It's something that my family always made when I was growing up. My mom would always make it for me, and I didn't realize it before that a lot of other kids at school had never had it before. And so they have this brown tint to it. So at first, my classmates were a little bit weary when I brought it in to share, but they tried it and they enjoyed it so much that it made me just really happy that I could share my love and culture with other people.
Well, let's talk about your love of illustration now. Can you hold up the book for us? Because we want to see some of your beautiful work there. Look at that, Kai's tea eggs and that dragon. When did your love for animation and illustration begin?
I took my first art lesson at 9 years old, and since then I've just really loved every medium of art. So this book was done in watercolor and gouache like medium by hand, and I also work in acrylic, I work in digital painting, and at school I've been able to explore that a lot too.
Okay, so you won a contest with this work and then you figure, maybe I'm onto something here. How did you go about finding a publisher?
Yeah, it was such an interesting journey for me because it was my very first time even approaching like publishers. So I took a lot of advice from professors, from anyone that I could learn from, and I reached out to a lot of publishers. And how I found Arsenal Pulp Press is actually I went on social media and was like, I have this book and story that I care a lot about and I want to share with somebody. And they reached out to me, and it was a really wonderful connection and experience.
That was meant to be. What's been the reaction so far?
It has been really heartwarming. I didn't expect that so many people could resonate with this story. When I wrote it first, it was mostly from my own personal expression, but I realized just how universal the story about embracing your family and embracing these unique aspects of yourself can be. And so it's been really rewarding.
I'm looking at that image behind you. I know you've got some of your artwork on the wall there. I see the Golden Gate Bridge. Is that your image of San Francisco?
Yes, it is. I chose this as I'm working on a short film that is a love letter to San Francisco, and so I've been exploring some of the visuals here.
Well, and do you have any body or any particular style that influences your work?
Ooh, I take a lot of inspirations from everywhere. for children's books, I really look towards John Classen and Matt Forsyth's like illustrative qualities. They have this very dreamy look to their work, and that's what I try to achieve with mine as well.
Nice. So what are you working on next? I know you've still got courses to get through, and as you're saying, this short movie, but any plans to work on another book?
Yeah, I do. I have lots of ideas that I hope to explore more. My next topic is I want to talk about this traditional art form called Chinese shadow puppets, and they are this really rich. They have this really rich history to them in China and ancient China, and I really hope that I can like bring this art form back to life and like create a really meaningful story with
Karina,
it.
you are an amazing talent. Thank you so, so much. I see bright things in your future. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Romeo. And this is our Vancouver.
Signs of climate change are everywhere these days. We see news coverage of floods and wildfires, and then there's the changing food supply. And for some, the topic can leave them feeling hopeless. So the CBC's Johanna Wagstaffe asks the question, is talking about climate change making the situation worse?
It seems that signs of runaway climate change are everywhere this summer.
The climate time bomb is ticking.
It will be too late.
Act now or face irreversible consequences.
When it comes to climate change, sometimes it can sound all doom and gloom, like there's no hope. But I also know the science says it's not too late to turn things around. So what do you all think? Can we do it? So this has me wondering, is talking about climate change making it worse? To understand what can motivate us to take climate action, we need to dive deep into the human brain. What is going on inside the brain that leads us to feel compelled to achieve something? What fires up human motivation? Well, scientists have known for a long time about the importance of the chemical dopamine. Many of us know it as the pleasure chemical, but in fact, it mainly sparks motivation. Dopamine helps to generate both positive and negative motivation. It transmits signals in response to rewards, but also to stress or aversion. So, if we could figure out how to create the right messaging around climate change that would make our brain release positive dopamine, then maybe more people would take action. Now, this is where behavioral psychology comes in. One of the most common methods of stimulating dopamine is through external motivation. I will work extra hours to make extra money. The other way is intrinsic motivation, the enjoyment from the experience of that goal itself. I love working on Planet Wonder because I'm energized by the whole experience. That's true, by the way. So can we use these approaches to rewire the brains of the whole planet to make people want to slash greenhouse gas emissions? Because clearly, the way we talk about climate change now is not motivating most people to change their behavior. A recent Gallup World Risk poll found global concern over climate change actually fell 1.5% last year. To learn more about the power of language and messaging about climate action, we met up with behavioral psychologist Zhao, who goes by JZ, by the way. And what better place to start our journey than at Soaring Eagle Nature School? Basically, Planet Wonder goes to camp. Okay, JZ, is talking about climate change actually making it worse?
Yes. How we talk about climate change matters. The way we talk about climate change right now is unfortunately not great for engaging people on this topic, because the current narrative on climate change is about doom and gloom. We're heading toward the climate catastrophe. The framing right now is very negative, and this negativity makes us feel anxious, depressed, withdrawn. So we're actually not effectively engaging with the topic.
What's the alternative? I mean, how do we shift to a positive messaging while still staying true to the dire science?
I think the alternative messaging is positive. We have to make it positive. The approach I'm advocating for is the happy climate approach. It's basically telling people the things we can do in our lives that not only reduce emissions, but also make us feel happier as a result. I think that reframing can get more people into the conversation of climate change and get people to take actions on climate change.
I need to learn more about this. What climate change messages are you hearing lately?
We are getting to a tipping point, and if we don't make serious global concerted changes, that we are going to hit a point of no return.
What we hear in the news, climate change causing this weather, climate change causing that weather.
As Canadians, we have to take care of our wildlife, right? So it's kind of like if we live here, then we gotta take care of this place we live in.
I guess I'm concerned about the flooding, the one that happened last year in Abbotsford. So I do think about that quite a bit.
I feel like lots of people are like, well, if this is happening, we can't really do much to fix it, and they just push it off for future generations.
It is a total reframing because as a scientist, for so long, it's been about trying to get people to understand how serious the situation is. And do you think that's where we went wrong in the messaging?
Yeah, I think the doom and gloom narrative is too heavy. It's paralyzing. It makes us retreat and disengage. So the kind of the behavioral impact is actually the opposite of what we hope people would do. And this is where we need to turn the narrative into a positive frame. The other narrative is asking people to sacrifice, to give up, to reduce, to cut back. Basically, it's telling us to, no, you gotta give up your life to fight climate change. Things like drive less, eat less meat, fly less, shop less, waste less. You know, that's the kind of the personal sacrifice frame. It's also not great for behavior change because that frame makes us feel shameful and guilty. If you tell me, no, you gotta drive less and eat less meat, my response would be, oh, I feel terrible. You know, I feel bad for what I'm doing right now. And these negative emotions like shame and guilt are not, again, conducive to behavior change. So for so many reasons, we need to shift the narrative around and turn climate change to something that's positive for people.
Positive storytelling has the potential to change minds. Just ask a PhD candidate. Grace Nozick, show me your laboratory.
We just saw a new United Nations report underscoring once again that we desperately need political will for urgent climate action. But how do you build political will? It's actually stories. The stories we tell one another, the stories we read and share on social media, and especially the stories we consume in the news. What we actually need is grounded hope, a sense of agency, goals, a pathway, being able to see your fellow peers and citizens taking effective action on climate change in community as a collective. And what we also need to recognize is that these stories are not happening in a vacuum. I've spent the last 7 years studying how the fossil fuel industry has used so many different tactics to undermine political will through story. The other thing we really need to recognize is that our youth are disproportionately hearing these stories of apocalypse and doomism. We have this new study coming out in The Lancet showing that the youth in Canada and around the world are really being hit by this tidal wave of eco and climate anxiety. And we owe them stories of grounded hope for climate justice and climate action.
The words we use really, really do matter.
They do. Let me give you an example. Instead of saying drive less, we should say drive more people.
I see what you did there.
Why is that important? One, you're driving more people who would otherwise be driving by themselves. So you're saving the emissions by carpooling. Second, social connections. Hanging out with friends and family in a car actually can make you feel happier, because social interactions is the #1 predictor of happiness around the world.
And it doesn't make it sound like you're being told to not do something.
It's not to say don't drive or drive less. No, drive as much as you want, but drive other people with you.
Do you have any other examples of sort of that reframing of words?
Yeah, so instead of saying eat less meat, because that's a sacrificial frame, say eat more plants. because plants are great for our body, our mind. It's plants, vegetables. Don't say don't eat meat, but yeah, eat meat, but make it a treat.
It's a treat. It's a special
treat.
occasion.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you can enjoy it more. So that's the kind of the principle of happiness is abundance reduces appreciation. Instead, we should make those, let's say, high emission items, foods or activities a treat.
This really applies to me. I need to reframe my nightly Toblerone. That idea of reframing language is something the city of Vancouver is working on when it comes to development. When an Indigenous approach is taken, it's not just about building, it's about centering the language around how the land used to be before colonization. Corey Douglas is doing just that. Can you tell me more about your role as cultural advisor with the city of Vancouver for their sea level rise project?
I mean, if you look at the urban fabric of a city, nature is basically, it's not directly associated with any kind of urban fabric and or design. So what we wanted to do is ensure through our design analysis was reestablish that relationship between the Indigenous communities, being Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and repair that relationship between Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and nature.
At the end of the day, do you hope that overall, everyone who works and plays on this unceded land will be using words like accommodate versus retreat?
And I think it really comes down to understanding and appreciating pre-contact history and those relationships even from Indigenous community to Indigenous community, and how complex those relationships were, how the land had actually supported the Indigenous people and how it isn't today. How can we, as an industry, understand and appreciate and repair that relationship? Indigenous engagement comes in various ways. Like there are so many complex ways to engage an Indigenous community. We want the entire project to be injected with a cultural identity.
How does that apply both to individuals having conversations about this and sort of the messaging that we're getting?
The messaging matters as well. So not just the words we use, but the kind of messages we use. So one example is actually carbon tax is negative because nobody likes tax. So actually in a study done back in 2019, consumers like carbon offsets way more than carbon tax, even though it's effectively the same thing. So they prefer to fly or to purchase items with carbon offsets on it, and they are willing to pay more for it as opposed to paying carbon tax as a result. So for people who are concerned about climate change, yes, the environmental frame, the health frame is effective. But for conservative individuals, for people who are skeptical or are doubtful of the human contributions to climate change, that messaging doesn't work. Instead, we should use other kinds of messaging like saying that climate change poses a national security threat. So messaging that resonates with conservative values on security, protecting our families, protecting our homes, and also making renewable energy, the climate actions as boosting economic and technological development. So those narratives or messages actually resonate a lot with conservatives. That will make them take actions and care about climate change more.
Well, the natural beauty of our province continues to inspire so many of you to go outside with your cameras and share your images with us. So thank you. We'll start with this one. Ana Carolina Cervantes shared her impressions of spring and these lovely cherry blossoms in Vancouver's Cole Harbour area. Never get tired of these. Just beautiful. And Lisa Brome spotted some sea stars in Tunstall Bay on Bowen Island. Thank you for those beauties, Lisa. And finally, Dallas, England, with this dark and moody landscape near Pritchard. Simply stunning. Thank you. And do send us more if you're out and about with your cameras. Mail your favorite shots to us by email, bcphotos@cbc.ca. That's bcphotos@cbc.ca. Now, a new study reveals we can change old habits with the right intentions. Johanna Wagstaffe shows those habits the door. That's coming up.
CBC.
Growing up, shopping for produce went hand in hand with these see-through plastic bags, maybe a twist tie, trying to figure out which end was the open end. But it turns out that has become an ingrained but unnecessary shopping habit. Experts say the skin on fruits and vegetables is tough enough that as long as you give it a wash when you get home, you don't need that plastic that ultimately ends up in our oceans. The new UBC study wanted to see how easy it would be to break that habit using 12 different behavioral interventions. Everything from showing a picture of a turtle with a bag on its head to reward interventions. So offering to donate to an ocean conservation group if you don't choose plastic. Now this was done during the pandemic, so it was all online shopping, but every single intervention method resulted in a reduction of people choosing plastic when compared to the control group. The biggest turnaround was from the reward category. So 50% of people chose not to use plastic when a reward like a donation was offered. The study showed that habits can be broken, and hopefully one day choosing plastic will just feel weird. Bringing your own reusable shopping bags is the only option.
Johanna, thank you, and welcome back to Our Vancouver. I'm Gloria Makarenko. Well, the designer of the wildly popular board game Katan has died. Klaus Teuber, he first published the game about 30 years ago, and it has since sold tens of millions of copies around the world. Well, I caught up with the co-owner of Rain City Games and the CEO of Katan Studio on our afternoon show on the coast. What went through your mind, Pete, when you first heard the news about Klaus Teuber?
Well, Klaus Teuber is a very dear friend of mine, and I've known Klaus for over 27 years. And when I heard the news, I was on the road, and it was, of course, devastating. I still haven't recovered from it because he and I have been not just friends, but collaborators and compadres in trying to not just develop games together, but also develop the gaming culture more broadly throughout the world.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize you were such close friends. Our condolences go out for you,
Thank you.
At this time as well. And so from what you knew of him, from those collaborations, how does this particular game, Katan, how do you say it would reflect Klaus's personal values for what a game should be?
Well, I think Klaus wanted a game that was accessible to everyone, that was engaging and for everybody, that would move swiftly, that would be highly social, highly interactive, would be inclusive, and would have a positive theme. And most of all, something that was fun and could be played in an hour or two, and everyone, even the folks that lost the game, would say at the end of the game, that was fun and I'd like to play it again.
For a lot of us, Katan is one of the first really strategic, what we call European-style board games that we've played. It's sort of our first step away from Monopoly and Scrabble and all the classics that you grow up with. And it's our introduction to this huge and growing hobby. So it is in many ways the game, the first stepping stone that everybody traverses as they get into it. It really ticks all the boxes there. It's social, but you're also running your own strategy, and it sort of blends a lot of ideas from a bunch of different board games. So for those of us who grew up with the Monopolies, there's bits of that we recognize, a little bit of dice rolling, a little bit of trading assets, but then it branches out into more and bigger. And just the fact that it kind of weaves all of that together into one really cohesive, relatively reasonably quick game. It's fantastic. There's a reason it's been around for 28 years.
Klaus, and he of course loved the tales of the Vikings, and of course Katan is that parable of it's not just uncharted, it's an uninhabited island. So and we all love story. And we're going to continue to explore the stories of the past, the stories of the future, as we do with Starfarers and some of our other projects, and even stories in fantasy and fiction, as we did with Game of Thrones Katan.
Okay, and I'd like to hear from both of you, but Andrea, I'll start with you because Klaus gave an interview to Wired magazine, and he said, the secret of Katan is that you have to bargain and sometimes whine. So does that remain true to this day?
Yeah, there's a bit of whining. I can see that.
That works.
I mean, in the game, you are trading resources back and forth, and sometimes you just need more sheep, and you got to beg, borrow, and plead to get what you need to develop your settlement. So yeah, there's a bit of whining.
That's it. Pete, what do you make of that quote, bargaining and whining?
It's absolutely true. Katan, ultimately you can't win without creating sort of win-win experiences, but it's sometimes hard to convince the other person that you're trading with that it is a win-win. So you have to do a little bit of emotional, pulling and whining is part of that. And we saw that even in the Katan World Championship we had last year in Malta, where we had the best players from, 40 some countries around the world gather. And, these folks were very seasoned, and there was a whole lot of whining going on. In a whole lot of different languages and through a lot of different cultural methodology.
Hi, I'm Gloria. Hi, I'm Sayuri. And this is our Vancouver.
Breaking down, I never deal with it. Drown 'cause I don't wanna swim. I'm good with bad habits.
If you'd like to get out and see some live music, the art rock music group out of Montreal, Sunset Rubdown, plays Vancouver's Rickshaw Theatre, April 20th.
There was a rumor of a ghost in the bedroom, hanging in and around the bed. But by the time the moon rose, you had taken off your clothes and had the pillow.
And rockers from Ontario, Silverstein, they play the Commodore Ballroom, April 26th.
Hey, I'm Grant Lawrence from CBC Music, and I'd like to introduce you to a singer with a timeless vibe and a beautiful voice. Her name is Nico Paolo, and she currently hails from St. John's, Newfoundland. She arrived on the rock via Toronto and Portugal. More on that in a moment, but first, here is Nico Paolo.
Well, you loved me once before. Could you love me once again? Until the end, just asking, is it now or never?
Wow, filmed in Newfoundland around Cape St. Francis and Flat Rock. That is the incredible vocal talent that is Nico Paolo with her recent single called Now or Never. Amazing. And as I mentioned, Nico Paolo has an interesting transatlantic history. She was born in Toronto to Portuguese parents, and at the age of 2, Nico and her family moved to Portugal, where she grew up in a coastal town north of Lisbon. After graduating from design school, she wanted to live abroad, and her parents suggested Canada, since she still had the citizenship. So she moved to Toronto almost a decade ago and started her music career.
Your hands are tied, your hands are free, your sweet voice, your melody. Your hands are tied, your hands are free. So don't forget.
From Nico Paolo's debut EP from 2020, that was the song Please Don't Forget. Now, Nico is educated in visual arts, so it shows up a lot in her music and her videos. And by the way, that was Nova Scotia artist Rachel Hawkes and Cameron, her daughter, in that video. So, how did Nico Paolo make it from Toronto to now living and working in St. John's, Newfoundland? Well, according to Nico, she fell in love with the place and moved to St. John's in the fateful pandemic year of 2020 when things in Toronto, the big smoke, weren't so great. So Nico has since immersed herself in the thriving Atlantic Canadian music scene. On Nico Paolo's debut album, out on April 7th, she has players backing her up from Hey Rosetta and the David Miles Band, and Tim Baker, the former Hey Rosetta singer, is a frequent collaborator, and he co-produces the album.
Have you ever thought of dancing, feeling fine? Have you ever thought of dancing is moving into time? Time was never easy on you.
That's Nico Paolo, formerly of Toronto and Portugal, now of St. John's, with her latest single, Time. The video for that song was created by Sing Sing, the award-winning creative arts studio in LA. So clearly, the music of Nico Paolo knows no bounds or borders. Any of these songs are tunes that you need to add to your playlist for this week. I'm Grant Lawrence. Thanks a lot to Rebecca Gladney of Mount Pearl, Newfoundland for the shirt. I'll check in with you again soon.
Coming up, we head to Terrace, where city officials are grappling with the growing need for warm homes. Hi, and welcome back to Our Vancouver. I'm Gloria Makarenko. Well, an Indigenous man's death is highlighting a serious issue. An increasing number of homeless people, many of them Indigenous, are looking for shelter. Wamish Hamilton traveled to Terrace to find out what the city and its residents are doing about this crisis.
Hi, George.
Hi, Diana.
Welcome. Welcome to our territory, the unceded territory of the Tsimshian people.
Cheers.
Thank you. Welcome to our home. We called him Dickie. Dickie was his synonymous name everybody knew him as. Not only because of his loud, infectious laugh, but his voice alone. You can always hear him before you see him. Everybody said that. He always liked to protect people. He always protected me. I don't know what I'm going to do without my brother.
Terrace is a small city in northwest BC, home to about 12,000 people. This is where Dickie Nelson lived, in a tent. It's also where he died, on December 22nd, in minus 20-degree temperatures. He was 54. Dickie's family was surprised he'd returned here that night. The shelter says a bed was available. The Katan Society, which runs the shelter, was reluctant to talk to us or let us speak to people staying there. We can't ever know why Dickie stayed outside. But he died while others argued about helping people like him, how to turn around years of neglect.
Let's get down to the approximately over 372 signatures that are asking the shelter not to go through.
Even before Dickie died in the cold, Katan had been the focus of heated debate and the target of this petition, started by residents against the location of a new shelter.
I'll tell you, I'm going to protect myself and my property at all costs. These guys come into my yard and try and rip me off and steal stuff off of me so they can go buy drugs and alcohol. That's not going to fly. That's not going to fly in our little tight little neighborhood there.
After the meeting and the tension it exposed, Katan hired a spokesperson who would only agree to a telephone interview.
The demand for shelter services and all the associated support services has been increasing consistently for years now. That being said, not everyone who is experiencing homelessness chooses to use the shelter spaces. So we don't actually have a hard number for the amount of beds that we need.
Not everybody in the community shares the same sentiment about the shelter. How are you navigating that type of tension?
Well, I mean, the tension exists.
Katan says the new shelter is needed more than ever. It's 5 times larger and replaces their old one, but it doesn't offer drug treatment or recovery support, services some have called for.
I believe everyone deserves help and the care they need. But this type of shelter only provides a bed and food for the night. It doesn't deal with the addiction, the pain that's caused the addiction in the first place.
Homelessness is a concern across the north. Latest rates show a 12% rise, with Indigenous people being hit hardest. Paul Lagasse in Prince Rupert sees it firsthand.
It would be nice to say, hey, let's put the shelter up and we'll solve the problem. But then, we find ourselves having to build another shelter.
The causes of homelessness today are many: rising rents, boom and bust employment cycles, intergenerational trauma, a toxic drug crisis, the pandemic.
I will say the BC government has been very, very good in investing for our most vulnerable here in the north and in Terrace. But again, the expansion of homelessness has, the pool has broadened.
Terrace Mayor Sean Bouita says his city is confronting these issues, but he wants the province to do more, especially for mental health and addiction support.
And without that kind of treatment, how can we support these folks? Terrace has got one of the largest per capita First Nation population, so which in turn means that we have one of the largest per capita trauma for residential school. And it feels to me that the supports just are not there for people. And I think the way for us to move the dial is to get the Nishka, the Shimshin, the Kitsilif and Kitsum Kalim, the Teltan, the Haisla, the Haida, and the municipalities in the area, and then all go to the province and say, this issue needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved in the Northwest now.
The Northern First Nations Alliance is tackling this.
All of our communities are pulling together to say, look, we all have to share the same issues.
Arthur Renwick, who is Haisla, speaks of their joint effort. He says these issues are a terrible legacy of residential schools, among other colonial projects.
The impact has been huge, and this is the result of it. And healing is really important, and that's the main thing. The main focus is for us is like, how can we heal ourselves?
Some debate the best way to help. Others build walls. Meanwhile, vulnerable people like Dickie continue to live on the margins and die alone outside.
My brother's buried in here between my father and my mother, our mother. My brother's really lucky to be with my parents. He was cold. They said, let's go home. So they took him home.
Wamish Hamilton, CBC News, Terrace.
Coming up, boom and bust. Another roller coaster ride for BC's film industry. Hi, welcome back to Our Vancouver. I'm Gloria Makarenko. Well, there's budget cuts, a changing media landscape, and upcoming negotiations. Those are just a few of the issues in a slowdown of BC's film industry. And as we find out, it's leaving some workers wondering where their next paycheck is going to come from.
It was a little scary. I wasn't sure if I was going to actually get anything.
Paula Negrito has been working steadily in film the past few years, but the last few months have been tough.
Kind of worried about how to pay rent, so I had to access some funds that are available to workers in the film industry, and that was a savior.
From blockbuster films,
did I leave the stove on?
To TV series and even commercials, BC's film industry contributes nearly $2 billion to the provincial economy, and it employs nearly 30,000 people. But many of them say it's been a struggle to find work in the past year, and workers here aren't alone.
When we look at what's happening in BC and really what's happening around the world and in other major production centers, whether it's in the United States or even Ontario, it's kind of the same thing, where there's been what we might look at a bit of a retraction from the peak TV, the volume of stuff that was happening in the last few years, sort of before the pandemic and certainly during the pandemic, to more of a balancing out.
In the last few years, streaming services like Netflix, Amazon, and Apple TV have invested millions of dollars in new content. And now that golden age of TV is slowing down. And some say contract negotiations with unions like the Writers Guild is making matters worse because productions don't want to start in case the writers go on strike.
There's a lot of people not working, and people are getting a little worried, for sure.
Workers eager to get back to making movie magic and paying the bills. Marie Zeidler, CBC News, Vancouver.
You know, financial boom and bust in film is an age-old drama. But about 40 years ago, the struggles that the industry faced were a little bit different. So let's take a dip into the CBC archives to see what was happening then.
The movie business in Vancouver in the last 18 months has undergone as many perilous moments as Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, their major advertising outlets have been shuttered, but they're still going strong.
It's not been a great year in the industry.
He says the big chains will survive because of pre-sold features and the fact they have so many outlets. The Odeon Group has much the same battle plan. The money is just spread around more to other advertisers. Also, Odeon has made up a playbill sheet, which will be widely distributed. Alan Wickberg, who manages the Cornet, says theater operators learned from the last Pacific Press dispute and were prepared for this one.
To the general movie-going audience, they like to be entertained, so they're watching TV, they're listening to the radio, and for those reasons, they're going to find out what we're playing. They're going to know.
Independent houses such as The Ridge, with a loyal clientele and less dependence on the dailies, will not likely notice the difference unless the strike lasts a very long time. The theaters have withstood the advent of television in the past, and more recently the introduction of videotapes and discs, and also the second major newspaper strike in just the last few years. They'll likely survive this as well. Bob Gillingham, CBC News on Granville Street.
Now, at the end of this program, we like to tip our hats to our talented photojournalists on staff here at CBC Vancouver. They bring us images in their artful ways to give depth and character to the stories that we cover. So here's a sampling from what they saw this past week. And that's all for our Vancouver for this week. I hope you can join me weekday afternoons on CBC Radio 1 for On the Coast. For now, bye-bye.